You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 53, Speaking Ukrainian. Hello, language lovers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast in conversation with multilinguals. My guest today is Kim, who joined me to talk about her journey to learning the Ukrainian language. Her story is truly remarkable, and you'll want to stay tuned for a very unexpected and emotional twist. In this conversation, Kim talks to me about growing up in the UK in a Ukrainian family, but not learning the language from a young age. We talk about the importance of food, traditions, and community in her local Ukrainian club, and we talk about how her experience has been with learning the language as an adult, the resources she's using, and the ins and outs of Googling in Cyrillic. On a personal note, Kim describes her first trip to Ukraine and what it's been like for her reconnecting with family, not just in Ukraine, but also in Belarus. You'll definitely enjoy hearing Kim's tale of reconnecting to her heritage through language and establishing connection across generations. I want to say a big thank you to Kim, not only for sharing your story, but also for trusting me with it. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a longtime listener of the show or a recent listener, you can now support us on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I am joined today by Kim. How are you today, Kim?
I'm great, Elle. Thanks for having me on your podcast. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and I'm so happy to have you here today and be able to talk to you. And I know you're all the way in the UK, so I really appreciate you making the time to chat. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and how many languages do you speak?
Wow, the first question. I speak British English. That's my my native language. You'll most definitely hear a Yorkshire twang in there because I'm from the north of England. And in terms of languages, I'll break it down. If do you want me to go through each language?
Sure.
Okay, so French, I used to be fluent. I used to live in Paris for a little bit. I'd say now it's a bit rusty. I'd say I'm very much conversational, but when you get into some topics, I can probably understand the context, but haven't got the vocabulary to respond.
Right.
Mandarin, I lived in China for a little bit, so I used to be able to get around town and little bits with the language there, but I can't remember anything apart from hello now. I wrote down a little list actually because I thought Arabic. I have tried to learn little bits of Arabic, but that's more about being polite for the holiday. Like if you go on holiday to a country that speaks kind of Arabic, so if that counts or not, but I have put the time in. Russian, a very tiny bit, mostly because I've got family who live in Russia. And Belarus, a little bit of words there. And finally, Ukrainian, which is the one I'm learning at the moment. It's basic. I've had awareness of Ukrainian since I was born, but I've actually only been actively learning it for a year.
Okay. That's exciting. So you have a bunch of languages from all over the world. And how was it like when you were living, I guess, in France and you're living in China and learning French and Chinese? How was that immersive experience helpful for you when you were learning?
Absolutely incredible. My French was, I don't know how I got a job as a translator in France. I honestly do not, because I could read and do all the academic French, but you realize when you go to that country, oh my God, my language skills are horrendous here. But it was an amazing experience. And my manager, when I was working as an assistant translator, he was really good at sort of helping me, like making the deep end a little bit less deep.
Hmm.
Give me, I think a lot of it was about confidence. I've got these skills, but I'm terrified to apply them because
Yeah.
what if, so, I think I'm really good at French. I've been speaking it for 10 years. What if I go to a shop and I can't even order some bread? I mean, gosh, cringe. So, but it really changed how I speak French. I was told at one point in a different part of France, like, oh, wow, where did you pick up a Parisian accent? I'm like, what? I've got a Parisian accent? I'm from Yorkshire. Madness. Which is crazy. And now I think it really drilled the language into me. I left France in 2004, I think,
Mm.
about 3 or 4. It's a long time ago, but I can still, swing back into it. It's really drilled into my brain.
Yeah.
And as for Mandarin, like a very naive person, I got a job teaching English in China, and I was told we'd have like a little immersion course with some language skills in it. So I never really had the time to learn Mandarin before I got the job and flew out. It was like 3 weeks to get my life together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, crazy, right? I applied for a job, didn't get it. The person who they offered the job to didn't actually, they turned it down, and I was second on the list. And I was like, oh my God. So obviously you're saying goodbye to your friends and your family and packing your life up, and you think, oh my God, I'm on the flight. I don't know how to say hello. Oh my God, so embarrassing. Um, but Mandarin's such a fascinating language. I find sort of the way that the language is structured very, once you get your head around it, very, very easy in
Hmm.
terms of the way you sort of put a character or a sound at the end of a sentence to change the tense. And because I'd only ever had exposure to French and German and Spanish in school, it was fascinating. So I got myself a tutor, and I spoke to my students, and I was able to, get around town, order a taxi, have a bit of a chat. But I sadly haven't kept that up.
Mm. How long were you there?
Just 6 months.
Okay. Wow. So in 6 months, you were able to just be able to maneuver around. And what city were you in?
I was in a city called Tianjin, which is about an hour and a half southwest of Beijing. So it's in the northeast of China.
Yeah.
Really beautiful spot. And I think just being immersed in it, when you're hearing language every day, you start to recognize bits of it. And then I think once you get to a point learning a language where you start to be able to express yourself, it really motivates you.
Mm.
At the start, when like with Ukrainian, I took me a long time to get my head around the grammar, and I'm still very much getting my head around the grammar. And at some point, you kind of think, am I ever going to get this? Should I just give up? And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden, it just clicks, and you think, oh yeah, and that is motivating to carry on, and be able to express yourself and not go into a shop and say, hi, do you speak English, all the
Right.
time.
Right.
Definitely a motivator.
It really is a motivating thing, I think, too. So when you were growing up, what languages did you hear spoken in your home or in your community?
Really good question, Al. So my family's of Ukrainian heritage. It was
Mm.
my granddad, and my grandma is from Belarus. They both came over to the UK as a result of the Second World War. My
Okay.
grandma came they both came as refugees, really,
Mm.
and settled into a Ukrainian community in the north of England. There are a few of these in the UK, mostly in the north.
Hmm.
And that's my dad's side of the family. So he grew up with his first language being Ukrainian.
Mm.
Although you could never tell, he had the strongest Yorkshire accent ever, and that was the language he spoke at home.
Hmm.
He married my mum, who's English. So when I was a child at home, the house language was English.
Okay.
But when we visited my grandparents, it was a Ukrainian household, and my mum always tells me that before she married my dad and she'd go and visit my grandparents, they'd always speak English when she was present. But
Mm.
pretty much she noticed when she got married, and this is not a bad or offensive thing, it was more she felt it was an acceptance thing. Oh, I'm part of the family now, they trust me,
Hmm.
because they speak Ukrainian. And then occasionally my granddad or my dad would just turn to her and translate and go, by the way, we're talking about this. But she'd actually say, I know what you're talking about, because my grandparents came over in the 50s. They
Yeah.
brought the Ukrainian language of their time with
Hmm.
them. And if you think of all the inventions that have happened since the 50s, microwaves, washing machines, all these kind of things, they in their version of Ukrainian they brought with them. they don't have the Ukrainian words for that, and they didn't have the internet or anything. So occasionally they'd be chatting and blah 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 microwave, blah 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 washing machine. So my mum was always saying, I can kind of follow what you're saying and whatever. It sounds like whatever.
Hmm.
But so I grew up listening to that language. And there's a Ukrainian cultural centre where the community was attached to. That's called Huddersfield Ukrainian Club, and we spent a lot of weekends there. I was part of a dance troupe, and there was a Ukrainian school, a band, and a choir, and I spent most of my Fridays and Saturdays there. And
Mm.
that was Ukrainian was very much spoken there as well.
Hmm. That's amazing. What was that? What was being part of that community like? You're in England, and I know that English identity can be so strong. But then being a part of this Ukrainian immigrant community there that is holding on to their language, their traditions, their heritage, essentially. Like, what was that having those touchstones as you were growing up?
So from a young age, I think I was very aware of my Ukrainian heritage, and the older I've got, the more aware I've become of it. I think from a young age, because of this, I've always been really aware of cultures that were not just British. So no
Hmm.
matter where anyone's from, just because they're white, for example, don't assume that they're English.
Hmm.
Almost like cultural blindness,
Yeah.
for example. And I think on top of language, you've got culture, and language is more than just words and grammar, isn't it? It's a feeling, it's identity, it's belonging, it's history. And I think protecting things like language and culture, people express themselves so differently and such more confidently. And I think just being aware of that can be quite evocative. But growing up, it felt normal, because if you think it's all I've ever known. I very much a big part of that Ukrainian club's dance group when I was 4 years old.
Hmm.
But when I hit my teens, I started to be a bit embarrassed about it. We in my family, we didn't celebrate strong things like Ukrainian Christmas in the house so much, but we'd go to the Ukrainian social club and celebrate Ukrainian Christmas with the other Ukrainian families and other children. So it was something we did in the community centre, but never took it home,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And I remember one day at school, we had a thing called non-uniform day, where you could either wear fancy dress and pay like £1 for charity, or just wear
Hmm.
your normal clothes. And for some reason, my mum convinced me to wear Ukrainian national dress or my Ukrainian uniform, like dancing uniform or something like that. And she was doing, trying to instill this pride in me. It's more than a strange surname you've got. There's something attached to that, and it's you've got this blood running through your veins. But I remember walking to school in my outfit, thinking, "Oh my God, someone is really going to give me absolute hell for doing this." And
Hmm.
luckily, there was no bullying or anything like that. But I remember walking to the bus stop, thinking, "This was a silly idea. Why have I let someone convince me of this?" And that really became sort of part of me trying to split from that culture, if that makes sense. I decided that I wanted to hang around with friends on the weekend rather than go to dance class and miss all the gossip. And I started to
Hmm.
pull away from it, really. And it's only been in my 30s that I've really felt that I've wanted to pick that up again. That I realized that being Ukrainian is a big part of my identity that I almost took for granted.
Right. How did you relate to the language when you were that age? Um were you being taught to speak the Ukrainian language? Did you express interest in wanting to speak the language outside of this cultural center that you were involved in? Or what was your relationship with the language when you were younger?
It's funny because think if I think about Ukrainian, how it sounds the first time I went to Ukraine, which was only 3 years ago, it sounds like a big hug to me. I can't understand it, but just the way that the vowels sounds super familiar and comforting, like a big bowl of soup.
Mhm.
Um, I think I was aware I could speak a little bit and I could understand it rather than speak it. So if I overheard someone saying something, I knew a small child had been told off, that kind of thing.
Right.
But I never actively learned it. I remember asking my mum about this recently, and she was just saying, you were never really keen, you never really expressed an interest. But I think part of it was this cultural centre was a good, half an hour, 40-minute drive from my family home. I was
Hmm.
already going there on a Friday evening for dancing, and the Ukrainian school that they set up to teach younger children the Ukrainian language was Saturday. And there's been a lot of, schlepping about from parents who already schlep around a lot for their children. But I
Yeah.
do remember asking my grandma and saying, can you teach me some words in Ukrainian? And I remember going upstairs and in her house and bringing down some children's books that used to be my dad's, and her reading and pointing out, these really old tattered books that, I don't know where they got these things from, because no one
Hmm.
had been back to Ukraine. A lot of people were scared to go back. I
Yeah.
think that's what I was understood. I would like to disclose at this point, if I mention anything that's historically incorrect, I'm only going on my own family's experiences and what I've been told, if that
Okay.
makes sense, just in case anyone's like an expert on ex-Soviet history and goes, that doesn't sound right. I'm going on what I've been told. Disclaimer over.
Yeah, we're not historians here. So.
I remember asking her to write down the Ukrainian alphabet and going, wow, some of these characters are mad. But it never really went on from there. And I wonder if I remember my dad telling my grandparents, oh, yeah, Kimberly's great at French and she's 10 years old, teaching herself French before high school, and she's going to live in France and go to university in France and all this kind of stuff. And I have sometimes wondered how they felt about the language. Did they want to pass it on? Did they feel it wasn't useful for me? Like, why did that never happen? Or was it me who actively as a child said, I'm strong-willed and I don't want to learn it? And I
Yeah.
guess I'll never know.
Huh. One thing that I'm so interested about this, and I will say like my I don't have a second family language. My first language is English. I grew up in New York City. I don't have like a heritage language other than English. So I'm always so curious about the generational um the way that generations pass down their language. I think you mentioned that you did the Ukrainian dancing. What other kind of activities were really involved in this heritage center? What did people gather to do? Was there food involved is
Oh
really what I
God,
want to know.
so much food. Oh my God. Whenever I see people go, oh, I love pierogi, I'm like, well, my culture has that. We just call it something different. So
Mm,
no. Pierogi is delicious, by the way. I just
I
the
love
Ukrainian
them.
one that we have is the mashed potato, which is we call it Russian dumplings in
Mhm.
Poland, I believe. But yeah, I mean, this cultural center was very much about people had come and they had no relatives. So they created a family of their own. These
Okay.
everyone in the center was essentially a big old extended family, and every you've got 25 aunties all of a sudden, and there's hundreds of people part of these communities. They're big. They used to be a lot bigger. But back to the foods. Borscht, have you ever heard of borscht? It's a good
I
old beetroot
have,
soup. Yeah,
yeah.
wow, oh my God. So we have holubtsi, which is cabbage rolls stuffed with rice, mushrooms, and a tomato sauce.
I love halupsi.
Oh, you know holubtsi.
I do. I
Amazing.
haven't had it in like 15 years, but I had it like a homemade bowl of it once, and I've
Oh,
never forgotten it. It was amazing.
I made it for the first time actually this year. Ukrainian Christmas on the 7th of January. I had more time than I realized because of lockdowns, etc. And it was a lot easier than I thought. But it also never tastes as good as your grandma makes.
Oh no.
But in the center, I mean, there's always someone cooking something for some reason. I just remember like wafts of food and meatballs and things for various dinners and things. But there's a big church community, a lot of Ukrainian church. Obviously, as a child, I found that immensely boring. I'm thinking, oh my God, another 2 hours of mass. But everything feels a lot longer when you're, 5, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, we there are things that the club still does now to keep the community alive. They have Vareniki, so pierogi is Vareniki,
Hmm.
and they have Vareniki lessons where you don't have to be a member of the community to come and learn how to do it. But that's actually how I got back in, like re-immerse myself in the community, was plucking up the courage to go to one of these Vareniki
Oh,
classes after,
yeah.
what, maybe 20 years of, no, 15 years of not going to the club. In Easter, there is egg paintings. It's called Pisanki.
Mm-hmm.
And that's painting an egg with dyes and wax and making beautiful decorations. They a lot of
Ooh.
little festivals for children. So there's St. Nicholas in March, in December.
Mm-hmm.
And normally they have the annual Christmas, New Year and Christmas meal. This year that couldn't happen because coronavirus.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of activities that go on around drinking, dancing, generally just celebrating the community, really, and bringing people together. The older some of the community get, there's a bit more isolation, etc. as well. But
Mm-hmm.
saying that, in the Ukrainian class I'm at the moment, which is run by the centre, then there's three groups of classes, and I think a fair few of them are, my age in their 30s.
Oh, wow.
So I
I
think what's
love
happened.
I love
Sorry.
hearing no, I was saying I love hearing that because a lot of these kind of organizations, they get so much smaller when their older members are um, no longer with us.
Yeah. And what's really happened is I had a journey where I found out me and my mum did a lot of family history research, and that's how I ended up starting my journey into learning Ukrainian. Was I learned to Google in Cyrillic. I was having no luck finding my granddad's relatives whatsoever. I learned to Google in Cyrillic, and every so often I kept Googling Ukrainian lessons, and there was just nothing available.
Mhm.
So I gave up on that. Found my granddad's native village because we didn't know the name of it. Flew to Ukraine, met my relatives, came back, and thought I've really got to learn this language
Oh
because
my
it's
God.
embarrassing to have to take a translator with me when these people are related to me by blood. I've got to learn this language somehow. And eventually, I saw the Veronica lessons advertised and thought, I'm gonna just go along. And the person hosting it, it turns out, used to be in my dance class when I was a child. They were like 2 or 3 years older than me. A few of the people there were also in a similar position where they wanted to reconnect with the club. They'd been to Ukraine and got back in touch with their relatives and rekindled sort of this relationship with their relatives. Now their grandparents are no longer with us.
Mhm.
And I think the conversation started happening, why don't we find a Ukrainian teacher and why doesn't the club put on classes?
Yeah.
And that started. So in February, that's what happened. And we went to lockdown soon after. So it's all on Zoom now. But I think there's a lot of that. It's just almost like I didn't learn it as a kid and I've kind of got over not learning it as a child. I think for a while I was just sort of hung up in my 20s going, why didn't anybody teach it to me? I felt like I've missed out on something. I thought I can take control of this. I'll learn it myself, but blaming other people.
How did you learn to Google in Cyrillic?
God, how? That's a really good question. Um, I I realized I was using Google Translate to translate various bits like my surname,
Mm.
and I just learned. I Google translated my surname so much I could write it without looking. And then I just sort of started learning other words, and it just went from there really. And I just thought, I don't know, I recognize it. And Russian and Ukrainian are not nowhere near the same language. When you read to like a Russian word and a Ukrainian word, it's either very different or it sounds very similar. It's
Mm.
never sort of a pattern there. So I guess maybe I could probably understand a little bit of Russian, but with Ukrainian, I had to start again really from the basics, the full. When I had my first Ukrainian class, it was very much on the alphabet, properly
Oh,
starting again. With French, you
yeah.
never had to do that. You know the alphabet; it's the same alphabet. And with
Mhm.
Ukrainian, you have to very much start again.
Oh my gosh. What was that like?
That journey is still ongoing. My With Ukrainian, there's like a print version, and then it's like English, I guess, like a print version, a joined up handwriting cursive version. But Ukrainian cursive is so different to printed Ukrainian. I can't
Mhm.
read my own Ukrainian cursive back. For example, the letter that is D. And if you write it in cursive, it looks like a strange A.
Okay.
They had to describe it like a strange capital A. If you write it in cursive, capital, it looks like an English letter D.
Huh.
If you write it in cursive, like a small letter, not a capital, it's a G. The
Oh,
same letter as a D or a G, but it's actually said D, and it looks like an A when it's written in. It's so confusing. So you have this like mind game with yourself, and I still, when I'm reading, I practice reading with a Ukrainian pen pal I found.
oh, great.
We meet on Skype once a week, and she's actually really good because I not only get we do half an hour English, half an hour Ukrainian, but I get to tap into the cultural side, the questions I could never ask my grandparents, that kind of thing. And so I've really tapped into what it's like to be a Ukrainian, like modern Ukraine,
Hmm.
heritage, history. It's amazing. But
Yeah.
when I read to her, I very much mix up what a P in Ukrainian. Sorry, a P in English when it's written in Ukrainian is an R. So there's little things like that. I will go like soup, sur, and it's actually soup or something like that. But
Yeah. Oh
it's
my
practice,
gosh.
isn't it? It's just a case of practicing.
Yeah. Yeah. And how have you been back to Ukraine since that first time that you went?
I haven't. The first time I went was November 2000 and I want to say 18. Just look at the calendar now. Well, lockdown feels like everything's into one, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But I haven't. That was very much a whistle stop.
Hmm.
Booked. Well, didn't really plan it. I just was so excited to find out this name of my granddad's village. I hired a researcher and off I went. I spent a few days in Kiev just pottering around and getting a feel for the country. Went by myself, and then I got the train across to Lviv, which is a 5 hour trip. Met my boyfriend there, and we had a good few days there.
Hmm.
Met my family, and very much was like, oh, we're back soon, we're back soon. But then life sort of takes hold, doesn't it? And then lockdowns. I'm in touch with them on WhatsApp. They're aware that I'm learning Ukrainian, and I've set myself a goal of when I do go back, which is looking like, the longer this sort of pandemic goes on, the longer it looks, but it's probably going
Hmm.
to be about a year.
Yeah.
It's I'm hoping to be not I don't think I'll be fluent by a long shot, but moderately conversational. Just the idea of being able to say, what is this food, or if you're having a dinner table conversation, be able to participate a little bit. I just feel like I'll have done my grandparents proud. I'll have just, really just
Mm.
tapped in, and it will have come full circle.
Yeah. That would be I can't wait for that day for you. Like that's so exciting to just think about, I think.
Yeah, they so when we WhatsApp, we both write in Ukrainian, but I'm very much still using Google Translate. I'm starting to be able to read some of the things they write, but the Ukrainian verb endings are just there's just so much to remember, and I've still not learned all the rules. So sometimes I'll think I recognize half that word, but at the end, what is that all about? So
Mm.
still a lot of Googling, and it's very early days, but like I said earlier, I'm hitting that bit now where it's starting to make more sense.
Yeah.
And because I've got this pen pal, what I do is I have my Ukrainian Zoom class once a week. Then I'll speak to my pen pal, Katja, and what we usually do is sort of almost not quite go over my homework, but maybe we'll go, I did this for my homework. What do you think? Um, maybe we'll do some reading or something. And she's also said to me, if I want to record myself just reading a paragraph, she'll reply and read the same paragraph so I can compare her accent and stuff.
Oh, wow.
But it's about hitting that motivational point, isn't it? And going, right, I get it now. It's spurring me on,
Yeah.
but it's like
Yeah.
tricking myself sometimes. At first, I thought there weren't many resources about learning Ukrainian out there, and I thought, God, learning French is so much easier because a lot more people want to learn French. But once you dig deep enough, the
Mhm.
resources are there. It's just finding it.
What resources? Okay, so you have a class every week, you have a
Hmm.
pen pal. Aside from that, what are some of the other resources that you've been able to use and have been helpful for you?
Good question. So actually sitting next to me is a book called Master the Ukrainian Alphabet. And this is a book where I haven't touched like written in fancy, confusing Ukrainian cursive for a while. And I thought I need to get to grips because that's how Ukrainians write. If I'm
Yeah.
going to be able to read any directions anyone writes down, etc. So that's tracing letters I can do in front of the TV. But apart from that, there's I'd say Duolingo's not amazing, but for recognizing words and just, scrolling while you're making the coffee. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Reddit, there's some stuff on Reddit about Ukrainian. There's another app out there called Fun Easy Learn that someone in my class recommended that's quite cute with a lot of pictures and visual stuff. And italki.com, I'm sure you must have heard of that.
Oh yeah.
So I found my pen pal on there, and I also found another tutor. So at the start of lockdown, when my work was a bit quieter, I was doing an hour of tutor a week, an hour of pen pal a week, an hour of lessons a week, actual class, plus all the homework. But now I realize that that pace is not feasible to keep up.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to my French studies, so I was doing French at the same time for a while, but I've decided to just focus on Ukrainian rather than keeping the French up because that will always be there.
Yeah.
With French, there's a lot of things you can listen to, like French news podcasts, French Netflix, that kind of thing. But I found out that Ukraine doesn't really have, for example, a film industry, and a lot of their
Huh.
content is in Russian. So it's not as easy to find, simple things on Netflix to have in the background, which does cause challenges in itself, really. But it's just
Yeah.
adapting to what's available.
That's really surprising that they don't have what about that I was going to say that they don't have a film industry, but what about soap operas or news broadcasts or music, like musicians, music,
Yeah,
anything like that?
music's a good resource. I've had a few people send me some songs where they think the diction is clear, so they think that might help me.
Mm.
Really good little band called Udin Ve Canoe, which translates to one in a canoe, I think. And
Okay.
they apart from like the lady having an incredible voice, looking up their lyrics and sort of almost following as you sit as like you can hear them singing along can be quite good. So it's about getting creative. As for soap operas, I'm not entirely sure if they exist. I'm going to ask my pen pal about that. I just remember asking her, "Can you recommend me anything?" And she says, "No. What we have things from other countries that are dubbed over. So
Oh,
it's
that's
about the
too
dubbing."
bad.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they apparently they're trying to get a Ukrainian film industry together, and there was some funding last year, as far as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But because they're trying to get rid of the Russian, reduce the Russian influence, I believe they've got some rules around language in the country now because a lot of Ukrainians can speak Russian and Ukrainian. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you go to Western Ukraine, for example, it's not advisable to speak Russian. Whereas if you go to Eastern Ukraine, people will speak Russian as a first language.
I'm looking at a map right now. Um, so if you go to, what did you say, Western Ukraine?
Western Ukraine, yeah, so like Lviv, and that's actually where my family are from. And people won't shout if you speak Russian in the street, but I've been led to believe that they would rather you spoke English.
Aha.
Just a bit of history there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it's ideal. They'd rather you didn't speak Russian. I don't know how applicable this is, only what I've been told.
Mm.
My friend lives in Kiev. She speaks both languages. I believe a lot of TV is either Russian or Ukrainian dubbed. And if you go to the east, people probably speak just Russian. They will speak Ukrainian as well, but it's the day to day.
Hmm.
That's my understanding of it. If anyone Ukrainian and Russian would like to correct me, I'm very sorry. This is again my understanding of that.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. And it's funny because I was thinking about this the other day and about how people nowadays are so keen to lean on pop culture, um, things in pop culture like music, movies, and shows and stuff to help them get through a language. But I actually was thinking, I think because I don't remember what language I was thinking about, but it made me think like I've never seen like let's say it was Greek, right? Like I've never seen a Greek movie and it made me wonder like about the film industry in Greece and like how come we don't have these movies here? If someone's trying
Mm.
to learn Greek, like, and then it made me think like do they make movies? And I felt so dumb because I'm like, of course they make movies. They have to make movies. Like this is 2021. But maybe they don't. And now that you're telling me there's no like film industry in this huge country of Ukraine, I'm really surprised. And I feel a little less dumb for thinking that for thinking that, about Greece earlier, but um
I'm trying to think. I've seen a few Ukrainian bits and pieces on Netflix, but I think there've been actually other people's like Ukrainian things that have been dubbed over. But on Netflix, there's a very famous Winter on Fire documentary. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It was about the Orange Revolution in the
hmm.
Maidan Square, and that's a mixture of Ukrainian and English. It's made by some Ukrainian filmmakers, but I don't know if it's a case of a very small industry that's independent or not at
Oh,
all, or maybe they're
yeah.
making films for other, in other languages.
Hmm.
I'm curious to go and give this some more Googling later on now.
Yeah, I'm super curious now because like you said, some languages like French, there's so many resources and you really you you won't run out of resources for some
Mm.
languages. And it's funny you mentioned that because I was really just thinking that like the other day. So um as you are on this journey learning the language and immersing yourself in the culture as much as you can, you know from um from England, what are some of the interesting and surprising things that you are learning about Ukraine and the Ukrainian language and the Ukrainian culture?
I guess, gosh, so much. I mean, from almost like a personal side, when I went to my family's village, I I was really, really shocked. When I was growing up, there was lots of big framed paintings on walls that showed beautiful mountains and almost like idyllic, looked like idyllic fairy tale scenes that you'd see in like a Brothers Grimm fairy tale book or
Mhm.
sort of storybook, and
Yeah.
mountains and snow with a beautiful deer on a hill and mushrooms and things. And I went to Ukraine. I was, oh, it looks like that. It is wooden houses, and at least where my family are from. It's a very rural village in the Carpathian Mountains.
Hmm.
And you think, gosh, you know what? People would come here and take photos and sell calendars. It's just absolutely beautiful. But I didn't realize how rural the life was that my grandfather grew up in,
Hmm.
and the way that when I went there, I actually went to the village and didn't find his family. We were we were knocking I literally rocked up and knocking on doors with a translator and going, "Hi, do you know this family? Hi, do you know this family?" And people going, "No, no, no." And then at one point someone would come, "Hold on, my family have lived in this house for a million generations. Come inside. It's snowing outside." Go inside. Oh, you must have a few shots while Bogdan's on the phone ringing all the village. So I'm there having shots with someone I've just met, some weird homebrew, while he's ringing around the houses. If we've lived here, if we don't know anyone, nobody will. And
Hmm.
that kind of thing. I thought, that's just stories that people tell. And I was thinking, it's snowing outside. I'm in a village with no phone signal. I've just seen a horse and cart, and the man unloading his shopping from it. Also, what is happening? This just doesn't happen to normal people. Um, and then when I did actually meet my relatives, they found them. They told me about the day my granddad left for war and how they shared a plot of land and how it all worked and the farm, and it was just amazing. It just blew my mind thinking about the 1960s sort of three-bedroom semi-detached house my grandparents owned in Huddersfield.
Mm.
Life was just so far removed, and I just sort of really took me back and thought how much their lives had changed and things like that. And of course, researching that, I learned a lot about the history, so much history. Um, and in terms of culture, I've learned a lot about um, Ukraine as a country now, what it means to be a modern Ukrainian.
Mm.
There's a lot going on, and when I speak to my pen pal, it's always, Ukraine is a poor country, and it's sort of it very much reminds me of my privilege, that huge privilege of being a native English speaker, living in a country like the UK. Lots and lots of things. Thinking, gosh, do you know what? Did my family? I have actually thought about this quite a lot sometimes. And I think, my family couldn't ever go home because they would have been killed or sent to a gulag. But when you think of some of the poverty that happened to my relatives growing up in the Soviet Union, did my grandparents, although they went through all that pain, did they come out better off as a result? And it's almost like who came off best. And I mean, it doesn't matter, we can't change it, but
Right.
it's all a lot of comparisons and thinking like, what if I could have been born in Ukraine. And one thing I have learned actually is a lot about Ukrainian subcultures as well, in terms of the village my granddad's from is um there's like three sort of main minority groups in Ukraine. There's the Hutsuls, the Lemkos, and the Boykos, and
Mm-hmm.
they're all sort of I think I'm gonna get this wrong, aren't I? One of the groups is like mountain people from the Carpathians, and they've got slightly different languages, different ways of dressing, different their own subculture of different weddings, different cultures. And my family is from a Boyko village, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not just about being Ukrainian. It's am I a Boyko, and what does that mean as well? And I would never have known any of this had I not have done the family history side of it, because just learning the language is would never have got me that far. And I'm a big believer that language is, it's part of a culture, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's more than just words and grammar. There's so much attached to a language,
Yeah, there is.
identity and things.
I like that you brought that up. I think that, culture really is, I don't think culture can be separated from language, whichever culture and language it happens to be.
That is really one thing I've learned. I remember speaking to my Ukrainian Belarusian relatives recently saying, I'm learning Ukrainian, sorry, I'm not learning Russian. Because
Hmm.
they speak Belarusian and Russian, which is also confusing.
Yeah.
But I said, but however, do you speak Belarusian? And they were like, yeah, we speak that. Why? And I said, well, I heard that Ukrainian and Belarusian are much more similar than Russian and Ukrainian. So
Mm.
perhaps if I understand Ukrainian, I could almost be able to converse with you too. And they were like, yeah, they're really similar. It's fine. It's cool. And I was like, oh, great. But then you would never assume that, you should never assume that Belarusian people and Ukrainian people celebrate the same cultures. I mean, there's a lot of sort of church, like Orthodox church things that would be very similarly celebrated, but not exactly the same
Right.
for sure. And there is still a lot of difference between those countries. And I think because a lot of these countries are ex-Soviet, it's easy to think, oh yeah, they're just all the same because they were one country for so long, but they weren't. They still got their own identities going on very much.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important to remember that, I think. Especially like again for someone like me who really, could not even pretend to speak Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian. Um, have you decided, or do you think that you want to learn Belarusian at some point?
I think it's probably more likely to be Russian than Belarusian.
Okay.
Um, one of the reasons is, so when I found one relative, like just more and more, I've kept coming out of the closet. My Christmas list, Elle, it is unbelievable. I, in England, after my dad passed away, my grandparents passed away. There's me, my mum, and my brother. Got the same surname, and that is it for immediate family now. We've got like my mum's got cousins. I don't have any cousins, and they're dotted around. But I went to Ukraine and found this massive family tree of cousins. Went to Belarus and the same. And a few years ago, I discovered that my Ukrainian granddad's brother was sent to a gulag in Russia. He ended up having to settle there. He had family there, so and his granddaughters about my age. So
Okay.
obviously we're pals on Instagram and the rest of it. Strong Instagram game, they're really good strong Instagram game. And then we found there's another relative in another part of Russia as well. They didn't know about each other, so now I've put them in touch and they're doing business together now, I think.
Oh, wow.
It's crazy. And then back to the Belarusian side, which came about crazily. They found me by going to a Belarusian TV show, and then the TV show flew me to Belarus to meet my family. That was just madness.
What?
I know. But I got a really random message a few weeks ago from my cousin Valentina out there saying, by the way, do you know you've got some like Georgian relatives that live in Russia? They're like your grandma's other nieces. I'm like, what? Yeah. She said, yeah, it's fine. Here's a WhatsApp number. And I WhatsApp them. So I must have like over 10 cousins now. It is crazy. Going from
Wow.
a tiny family, and I've not met many of them. It's a case
Hmm.
of, right, we've got some serious reunions to have, guys.
Yeah.
But it's just grown and grown, which is an amazing feeling, really, because I feel bad that my grandparents are never going to get to meet them, but I guess they'll have to put up with me as second best.
Mhm. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I also have a really small family, so I mean, I can understand how that feeling would be to go from a handful of people to like dozens of people all of a sudden. And so wait a minute. I want to hear about you being flown to Belarus for what? And I'm telling you, like, okay, I've always been so curious, like when they fly people out for these kind of things, like how do you handle that? Or what is it?
Well, so what happened was me and my mum is like a family historian. Genealogy is her major hobby, and she just never had much luck with finding people because of the languages, etc. While learning language is a great thing, but I guess Belarusian's never, it's not top of the list, is it really, in school when you get French and German thrown at you? Well, we do anyway. It's all about the European Romance languages over here.
Yeah.
But I remember someone contacted me on Facebook a few times going, "Hi, are you the daughter or a granddaughter of so and so who lives at this place?" And I was like, "This is weird. It is spam. It's just strange. Are you phishing?" Because they knew my grandma's name and knew about me, and I was like, "This is creepy." I
Mm,
ignored it. And then about a year or two later, I got an email saying very much the same thing. And eventually I sort of gave in. I was like, what do you want? Who are you? Obviously a bit more polite than that. But this guy, he was like, yeah, I'm a TV researcher in Finland for this Russian TV program. It's like primetime Russian TV. It's called Jdi Menya, and that means wait for me. Now, a lot of Eastern Europe, sorry, countries have been through war and lost people and displaced families and all sorts. So this program does a lot of that kind of stuff. They also do other things that people have gone missing, but it's a bit like a long lost family program where people can
okay.
go on and either hold up photos in the audience and go, okay, I've lost my sister. She was last seen at this tree at this bus stop. Has anyone seen her? Or they reunite families in other ways. So I was like, yeah, actually, yeah, that is me. What can I help with? And he's like, well, your family in Belarus are looking for you. It's your grandma's niece, so your grandma's sister's, no, your grandma's brother's son. I was like, what? This is madness. He's like, yeah, yeah,
Wow.
they've contacted a TV program. Here's what we do, etc., etc. Do you want to be? Um, would you be willing to work with us? I'm like, okay, sure. I said, great, okay. I was living in London at the time.
Hmm.
Um, and they wanted to do like a live broadcast with me and my mum on camera, but I was actually going to do a charity cycle ride in Africa or something. And I was like, can you like pre-film me? So they came and pre-filmed me and asked me these questions. And it's actually really sweet. They got my family into the TV studio in Minsk, the capital of Belarus. My family thought they were there to do an appeal. And I'm trying not to get tearful. I get a bit tearful every time I think about it.
No, it's
Um,
okay.
so what happened was my family thought they were going to do an appeal, and they go on TV and they're holding these photographs like, Nadia, she left home at 14, this awful thing happened to her, and there's this sort of very sad music comes on, and they go, if anyone's seen her, the TV program Judy Menu, can you help us? And all of a sudden the camera pans to someone outside the Royal Albert Hall in London going, well, we hear you're looking for your Nadia's granddaughter, Kimberly Marie. Well, guess what? We found her in London. Oh my God. So with sort of this interview with my mum and myself comes on TV. And it wasn't live. I wasn't able to see it. When I got back from where was I, Tanzania, I got like an email from the producer going, well, it's airing soon or something like that. And then my phone rang. They said, do you mind if we give your phone number to your family? I said, yeah, but please tell them I can't speak Russian. They're not going to be able to speak to me unless they speak English, which they didn't, by the way. So my phone rings and there's just howling and crying and Belarusian shouting. And I just quickly grabbed my laptop and I just Googled, I don't understand, which I think is like Yana Panamayu or something like that. And just like started going, I'm really sorry, I don't understand, and saying to like my boyfriend at the time, can you Google this? And it was just madness for 5 minutes, and I had to hang up in the end because they just weren't getting it. But
Oh
I think they were just
no.
so emotional, excited. It turned out they put an appeal in for this TV program years ago, and there's a massive queue. And this TV program put like a website up going, have you seen Kimberly Marie, and all this kind of stuff. But what happened then was I very cheekily emailed the producer and going, that's great, I've got a really good idea. Fancy doing a second episode? We could come to Belarus. And they were like, yeah, sure, we'll pay for it and everything. I was like, oh my God, what? So next thing I know, I'm begging for the time off work. I'm getting my mum to London. We're getting the visas sorted. And this TV company flies me to Belarus, and my family and this camera crew meet me at the airport. And still can't speak any Belarusian, but thankfully they have a translator.
Oh,
And
great.
the rest is history. I mean, we spent time staying at their house, which is amazingly funny because you've got a tiny little Russian phrase book to go by, and it's so much like I remember Valentina, my cousin's wife, she used to go like nyam nyam and like make like a spoon to mouth sort of
Yeah.
gesture, and that meant, are you hungry? And we sort of got by on these sort of weird sounds and hand movements because part of the time we had a translator from the university. But it was amazing. They took me one day to this wooden hut, and no one could explain to me what was going on because they couldn't speak English.
Mm.
And then they took me outside this wooden hut, and it was open. And then the translator rocks up, and it turns out that's the house that my grandma lived in. It's like, what? What? This is crazy. This
Wow.
is just such an amazing thing to experience. So it was definitely a once in a lifetime thing. And I'm so, so grateful for that experience. So many people get separated from their families and never get to do anything like that. And it actually makes me
Right.
really passionate about sort of volunteering with that kind of thing and helping people reconnect.
Yeah. I think that your story is so incredible. And I'm really grateful that you wanted to share it with me. I feel honored that you would share your story um with me and with my listeners. And I just I just can't believe that these things really happen, you know?
It's an absolute pleasure. I've been extremely lucky to be really persistent and stubborn, I guess, in terms of, I'm not going to give up. My family exists somewhere because I've got this surname I don't identify with.
Mhm.
I've never met anyone apart from my immediate relatives with this surname, which is crazy when you start writing it on a letter and mailing it, going, that's my name, it's going to someone else because I'm the only
Yeah.
person with that. But also, just I've just been so lucky that technology exists, it's been able to facilitate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone who wants to get in touch about family history or Ukrainian or Belarusian, what would be the best way for anyone to get in touch with you?
On Twitter, actually, I'm more than happy to help share any Ukrainian language resources or family history chats. It's at Kim underscore never enough. So KIM underscore NEVERENOUGH. I hope I spelled that right.
I'm sure you did. And I will add that into the show notes as well so that anyone who's listening will be able to just click and get in touch with you if they've got a burning desire to share something or to learn something from you.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm more than happy to help or hear from
Yeah.
anyone.
So I like to end each episode with the same question as well. And that is, do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice that you've learned in Ukrainian that you'd like to share?
There's one word in Ukrainian that sticks out for me, and I think it's because my Ukrainian teacher, Lydia, when we were learning about food, a lot of the time she said the word watermelon. So I'm just assuming she loves watermelons.
Hmm.
And the word in Ukrainian for watermelon is kavuna. And it's usually the only fruit I can remember because I really think Lydia likes watermelons.
Is it Kavuna?
Kavuna.
Oh, wow. Is she putting She's not like putting watermelon in like everything, though.
I just remember a lot of the examples when we were practicing sentence structure and things. I just remember watermelon was used a lot. And I was thinking, is watermelon a big deal in Ukraine? Is Ukraine famous for watermelons, that old watermelon soup? What is the watermelon all about? And then just watermelons all the time. So Kavuna.
That's really, and now I want to know like where are these Ukrainian watermelons?
Yeah, what's that about? Like, I don't know. I've never knew Ukrainian and watermelons went together, but here we are.
That's funny. Now, and I also it also makes me wonder what some other fruit and vegetable names like are they maybe kavuna is just uh easy to say and maybe like the word for apple is like trickier. I
Mm.
wonder now.
Apple is яблуко.
Yabluko.
Yabloko. Oh, like the pronunciation there. What else have we got? Pomidor, tomato. Um, Hrib is mushroom. We always remember that because I think it's hrib. It's really hard to say. The there's a few, but if I'm going to a restaurant in Ukraine, I'm probably just going to order apples and watermelon.
Perfect. Well, Kim, thank you again for this conversation. Thank you again for this conversation. I really, really enjoyed talking to you and hearing your story. Before I let you go, really quickly, in this situation, what would be the best way to say goodbye in Ukrainian?
Дуже дякую. До побачення.
What does that mean?
Thank you very much and goodbye.
Oh, I love that.
До побачення.
Thank you so much again, and I will be talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.